Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to the April 2022 First Friday presented by Holly Bieneman. I am Emily Widener, Education Specialist for ISPE. Our topic today is Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act in the Illinois Department of Transportation. The slides for this presentation have been placed in the handouts box. The link for the quiz questions will be placed in the chat. In order to receive a PDH, you must complete the quiz and answer 4 out of 5 questions correctly. Please place your questions in the questions box and the presenter will answer them at the end of the webinar as time permits. With that, I will turn everything over to Holly.
Thank you, Emily, and I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you all about planning and programming at IDOT. And if you pay close attention, all of the answers to the quizzes are going to be there. So, as Emily mentioned, my name is Holly Bieneman. I am currently the Director of the Office of Planning and Programming at the Illinois Department of Transportation. I have been with the Illinois Department of Transportation for 6 years. I started off as in the Bureau of Planning and then became Director of OP&P in September of 2020. Prior to that, I worked at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and while planning agency, I was actually in the programming area, and so really cut my teeth there and figuring out how funding works and evaluating projects essentially. And even prior to that, I worked for McHenry County as a planning liaison. So I'm very happy to be here today. This is the table of contents, what we'll talk about today. First, I just always like to highlight some fun facts, or fast facts as we call them, about Illinois. I'm sure you all are aware we are the 5th in GDP. We have just over, well, close to 13 million residents, 9.19 million licensed drivers, million of transit passenger trips, 54 transit systems overall, and the second largest transit system up in Northeast Illinois. And we have all 7 Class 1 railroads in the state of Illinois. We are the 3rd largest mover of freight throughout the nation, and that's in terms of tonnage and value. And I also like to highlight that 65% of the freight moved in Illinois is by truck. However, we are the 3rd largest mover of freight by truck. In other states, it's normally between 80 and 90% of freight is moved by truck. So that just talks to the multimodal nature of our transportation system. I also like to highlight that Illinois has the largest amount of local governments in the nation per capita. The next state that is close to us in terms of local governments is Texas, and they have 16 million more people than us, and I think it's about 2,000 less governments. So lots of coordination also that we work with in Illinois. So we do have a long-range transportation plan. It is an overarching policy document with these 5 goals. Each goal has objectives and then strategies within them. Then we also identified performance metrics to measure how we are doing on implementation, and we identified how implementation should move, like what actions we should take to implement. This guides all of our planning and programming decisions, and it's actually a fairly quick read. It's only about 90 pages, but with lots of graphics, and it guides. It's like what is our suite of plans, which I'll get into here. Like we have our long range transportation plan is this overarching guiding document, and then we've done more deep dives into certain modes and certain strategies like the transportation asset management plan, and all of them are rooted in the goals and objectives identified in the long range transportation plan. Then with all of these plans, which a lot of them involve collecting data and analyzing that data and working with stakeholders to make strategies for improving the system that it's related to, we tie that down to our programs. So our multi-year highway improvement program is driven by the TAMP and the bike plan and the LRTP. And then our STIP is also part of our multi-year highway, is guided, it essentially matches what's in the MYP with more information. The multi-year multimodal improvement plan program is guided by the development of the transit plan, the rail plan, the aviation plan, and the marine plan. And it includes all the transit funds through Illinois, all the rail funds, the aviation funds, and the marine funds, as Rebuild Illinois included funding for our marine system. And these are all of our programming documents. There's a number of them, and they all contain excellent information on how projects are prioritized, what kind of funding we're looking at, along with what we can anticipate to occur within the next 5 to 6 years. They're all on our website. We also map our multi-year highway improvement plan program. If you go to Getting Around Illinois, that information is on there. So now I'm going to talk about our revenue sources at the department and how we forecast them. So to develop the MYP, we have to develop the MYP, we have to estimate all of our revenues. And when I'm talking about this MYP, I'm talking about our highway program, our highway MYP. So we have direct sources of cash. Those are our motor vehicle registrations, our motor fuel tax, any interest income we earn on our funds. And then starting last year was we began to receive sales tax that is collected on the sale of motor fuel tax. It also includes any federal and local reimbursements. So the federal program is a reimbursement program. Therefore, we pay out to contractors who are building our projects, and then we seek reimbursement from the federal government. Same for local projects. If we put local projects on our letting and we pay the contractors, and then we bill the feds and we bill the locals, and then they give us funding back. They give us money back, and that goes into our funds. Then we also have financing, which is those bond authorizations that you hear of, where we send out, where we put out for bonds, and then that goes into our funds, and we can pay for things using the money that's in those funds. So Rebuild Illinois was huge for us. I stole this from CMAP, but this is showing the increase in revenue that we are receiving and where it is going. And so not all of it is coming to IDOT. A lot of it is, but our motor vehicle registration and other fees you can see is going to debt service, and then PAYGO, which is essentially it's going into our account and then we can pay for it, right? So that's what PAYGO means. Sales tax, some is going to debt service, some is going into our PAYGO. Same with our diesel differential, which is just a little extra funding that is charged per gallon of diesel purchase. And then the state motor fuel tax increase rate and index. So the motor fuel tax is indexed to the CPI. This is just a little flow chart that shows our motor fuel tax that we collect after Rebuild was effective July 1, 2019. We collect 38 cents per gallon on gasoline and 45.5% per gallon on diesel. And so that's that diesel differential. So gasoline before RBI was 19 cents per gallon to the motor fuel tax fund. Off the top came all of these things, including the diesel differential. Okay, and then 54.4% of that went to locals, and 45.6% went to the state. And this is where it went for locals, and this is where it went for state. Or it still goes. I shouldn't say did. And then for the Rebuild extra 19 cents per gallon, this is distributed differently. So 80% of it goes to highway maintenance, with 60% going to our state construction fund and 40% going to the locals, being distributed the same way the 54.4% went. Now 20%, this is the first ever PAYGO for transit in Illinois. And 90% of that is going for transit up in Northeast Illinois, and 10% is going for transit downstate. So now I just want to show this is the distribution, the actual funding that was distributed in 2020. So for this, it was 1.2 million, and here 950 million. And this is just showing you the actual numbers. And this is comparing, this table is comparing what we received in 2015 compared to what we received in FY20. So, I mean, we're seeing significant increases across the board based on RBI, which is great. All right, I'm going to go back here, and I just want to highlight that this is all motor fuel tax that I'm talking about, right? But we did have motor vehicle registration as well. And I want to talk about that because motor vehicle registration and motor fuel tax are two of the largest, they're our largest income, they're our largest revenue. And motor vehicle registration before RBI was our largest source of income. But with the increase that we received from RBI for the motor fuel tax in 2022, we started to collect more motor fuel tax than motor vehicle registration. And actually COVID-19 kind of exacerbated that because the Secretary of State was not collecting motor vehicle registrations. And even though RBI did include an increase in MVR, motor fuel tax is going to, it has surpassed it and is going to continue as it grows with the CPI. So as I mentioned, we're collecting all these revenues and they're going into our funds. So our funds are like our bank account, right? And this is where our money is going. We have our road fund, we have our state construction fund, grade crossing protection fund, public transportation fund, downstate public transportation fund, and our transportation renewal fund. So I do believe the bottom two were created as part of the, maybe the bottom three, I'm sorry, were created as part of RBI. We also have our bond funds. So this is where, when we sell bonds, where our money goes. And then we can, these funds are only allowed to be used for specific uses as outlined within the legislation. Okay, now I'm going to move on to developing the program. So now we know how much funding we have, and we're always interested in keeping a positive balance. Well, of course, we're always interested in keeping a positive balance, but a cash balance within our funds to make sure if there's any reason that we need to have funding or anything comes up. So when we're developing our program, we like to keep a balance in our road fund and our construction fund. So given that, we project spending and we project projects as they move out to develop our mark essentially for every year of the program. Once we do that, we take all of our restricted funds off the top. So our restricted funds are things like the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program that's programmed by CMAP and is programmed by East-West Gateway. And so those come off the top, and then we assign projects to it based on what CMAP and East-West Gateway decide. Our National Highway Freight Program, those projects were selected outside of the MYP development process. So we take those off the top, and then what is remaining is what we call our unrestricted program. And we distribute those funds to the districts. Each 9 district receives a mark, and we do that based on the formula here. So we consider things like fatalities, road lane mile needs, bridge deck area needs. You can see a lot of stuff here regarding the condition of our system. Then we use the TAMP, the districts use the TAMP to prioritize their projects. So 2/3 of our program are for the TAMP. We want to achieve a state of acceptable, we set targets to achieve a state of acceptable condition on certain types of roads. So our state of acceptable condition for pavement is a CRS of greater than or equal to 5, and bridges is an MBI greater than or equal to 5. We want to have more facilities in a state of acceptable condition on our interstates and our national highway system. And the reason for that is that the majority of our funding, which this is kind of a tricky thing too, but pre-IIJA, the majority of our funding was from, pre-RBI, the majority of our funding was from the federal government. And the federal government wants us to prioritize the interstates and the national highway system to be in a state of acceptable condition. So we have higher targets for them. And then we have higher targets for the state marked route, so they're kind of in the middle. And then the unmarked state route is our lowest percentage. So for example, the national highway system, we would like to have 93% of bridges on the national highway system at 93% of state of acceptable condition, where state marked route might be for pavement is 90%, and then unmarked state route for pavement is 50%. TAMP decisions are made using data. We get the condition of our bridges and our pavement annually. And then we have numerous engineers and researchers working together to make decisions on what is the best treatment at the best time to make sure we're maximizing the life cycle of our asset. And then we have capacity projects. That's the other part of the prioritization. Previously, you can see a teeter-totter behind the big red X here, trying to show our balancing act of what we would consider when identifying capacity changing projects. But last legislative season, we had House Bill 253 passed. That solidified our TAMP requirements in state legislation. It was already solidified in federal legislation. What was new for this was the prioritizing projects, capacity projects. It required the department to develop essentially a data-driven decision process for prioritizing those projects. So thankfully, the department had been working on that for many years, and we were pretty quickly able to announce a tool that we had and seek input on it so we could use it for the development of this current MYP. And so what I have on the screen here are the criteria that we considered using for our data-driven decisions. And we went out for public comment to make sure these were the right criteria, make sure that they were meeting the goals of Illinois. We also wanted input into which criteria should be the most important, which one should have the highest weight. And so we did that public outreach in October of last year. We've received feedback on it. We've made some modifications to the tool, especially considering the weighting. We had, of course, safety is our top priority. It was also the top priority that we received through our public outreach. We expected in District 1 for traffic operations and congestion to be, second priority, and we expected economic development downstate to be the second priority for not District 1. Surprisingly, in all scenarios, environmental impacts and livability was actually the second priority throughout the state. And maybe I shouldn't say surprisingly, because it is very important. And there's kind of a renewed, the House Bill 253 legislation was even kind of rooted in that equity, resiliency, and looking at those items for prioritizing our projects. So the next MYP is currently being developed, and we did use this tool, and we're going to share how we used it, what projects we considered, how they came out, any public comment we received, and the outcome of that public comment. And then we're also going to do a lessons learned next steps document where we're talking about lessons we learned through this round, and where we're going to go with the tool, because it's going to be changing all the time based on our priorities. So we also have our multimodal MYP. I've talked about this. This shows the projects for the transit, rail, aero, and then the ports and waterways. We have this funding is more complicated than highway funding in that there's a lot of different agencies that have the programming authority. In Northeast Illinois, the federal transit funds are programmed by the service boards. And so collecting that information, rail, there's a lot of other, this includes funding for private, rail projects and the relationship between the state and the rail, and improving projects for that. And then Aero is pretty basic, where we have federal and state funding, and same with the ports and waterways. So this document actually is supposed to come out at the same time as the highway MYP. Sometimes it takes a little longer. And it's also, anyone who's ever dealt in programming, it's always changing, right? And so that causes some issues for when we can get things published. Rebuild Illinois matches IIJA a lot in that it's multimodal. And so Rebuild Illinois was, a vision when it comes to that. So I'll talk more on that later. Okay, so spending the program. This is something that I get asked a lot. Normally after a few beers, which makes it just even more fun, right? What's the difference between appropriation, obligation, expenditure? And then there's even some more A words out there that can get a little confusing, but this is my easiest way to explain it, and it actually does have a flow to it. Appropriation is something that the legislator does to give us the authority to spend the money in the fund. So we have the cash in the road fund, and the legislator says you can spend $100 million of that cash. That is appropriation. And sometimes it is tied to specific projects. Sometimes it is you can spend $100 million on maintaining roads. So that is what appropriation is. Obligation is that the funding is set aside for that project out of the fund. So let's say the legislator says you can spend $100 million on maintaining the roadway system in Sangamon County. So then obligation is you can spend $1 million on Route 4 from this place to this place to resurface that roadway. The funding is there, the money is there, the appropriation is there, and the obligation is there that you can do it. Expenditure is IDOT has gone out, sought bids, entered into a contract with a vendor, and the vendor is doing the work, and they submit invoices, and we pay it. So that's the actual exchanging of the money from the fund to the contractor. So I mentioned this before that federal funds are reimbursements, and so what that means is that just with an expenditure, we enter into a contract with a vendor, and we are paying the vendor with state funds out of the road fund or the construction fund or one of the bond funds, any of those funds. We are paying them with the funding in that. Once we do that, we submit a request to, this is just for highways, to FHWA, and we say, we spent this much money, here's all the documents, here's what they're doing, we followed all the laws. We would like you to reimburse us for that. So that is how federal funds work. Now, you hear, I'm sure, a lot of different federal funds types, like I mentioned, like CMAQ or the National Highway Freight Program or STP, block grant. So those are programs. So those are specific programs, and the program apportionment, each program has a certain program size. So for example, CMAQ has excuse me, $1 million. The National Highway Freight Program has $2 million, and STP has $3 million. So altogether, we have $6 million of federal funds to spend. The obligation ceiling is that $6 million. So the federal government says you have $6 million to spend, and then the program apportionments are the specific amount for what we can spend in each program. Now, to make it super complicated, the program apportionments, if you add them all up, generally doesn't meet the obligation ceiling. The obligation ceiling is more limited. And so the obligation ceiling, you've probably heard of obligation limitation. That is the difference between the ceiling and our apportionment, essentially. So we always spend our obligation ceiling in Illinois. If we don't, then we're leaving federal funds on the table. And it's as you can probably already tell, it gets a little complicated, and it can continue to get complicated. Excuse me. All right, so we have our MYP, and we have an appropriation of, you know, I don't know, $1,000 in the first year. And I'm sure you all are familiar with this because it goes from year to year on how it's spent. So in the first year, maybe we're just doing engineering. In the second year, we let the contract and we get a lot of work done. So it spends over time. So that's something that we have to think about, and why we sometimes don't appear to accomplish our whole program in the year that we say we're going to. I mean, there's a lot of variables, but this is one of them. Also, I'm sure you all are also familiar with this, that it does take time. It takes a lot of time. I think this brochure, I don't know when it was made, but it was probably the 90s. And it's probably started to take more time, you know, but it does take a long time to get projects done. All right, IIJA, the exciting part, right? So we keep hearing a $17 billion number is being tossed out, which is valid. Yeah, the state of Illinois will receive, I think it's $17.8 billion over the life of IIJA. This is kind of just a high-level breakdown of what it is. We expect over the 5 years that $11.2 billion will be for formula funds. So those are funds that come to the state that we assign projects to or suballocate or go through our regular processes. 1.4 billion of that is for the new bridge program, which is huge. It is, I think our annual apportionment is $275 million. We are in early works of developing the MYP, and I can tell you that we're going to put more bridges in the MYP than just for this funding. So we have a lot of bridge needs in Illinois, and we're going to continue to prioritize those. I also like to highlight that previously, you know, we have federal authorization. We have always had federal authorizations, except for maybe like a couple days when there wasn't action by the federal government. But in general, we are always receiving federal funds, federal formula funds. And so that 17 billion, you know, is a large number, but we anticipated that we were going to receive some form of federal funds. And so if you're looking at it from like an increase, from our typical federal funds that we receive, we're actually looking at about a 12% increase from pre-IIJA to post-IIJA in existing federal funds, federal formula funds. So the majority of the increase in our federal formula funds are from 3 new programs that I will talk about. But if you're just looking at existing federal funds, it's about a 12% increase from last year to this year. There's significant new federal discretionary programs. I'm sure a lot of us are already familiar with RAISE and infra, formerly Tiger, formerly Fastlane. You know, they've had different names over the years. So there's a $16 billion for RAISE and infra. That was included in IIJA. Then there's $12.5 billion for this bridge program. That's on top of the $1.4 billion. $12.5 billion we can compete for. And when I say compete for, I'm saying nationwide, we're competing for these funds. And having worked closely with other states, there's a lot of need out there. So it's going to be very competitive. And then the IIJA also created a number of other new discretionary programs that I'll talk about. $66 billion for passenger rail. Most of this will be going to the Northeast Corridor. Public transportation, $4 billion to Illinois. And again, most of that going to Northeast Illinois. But the passenger rail is Northeast United States, not Northeast Illinois. Airports will receive $660 million for infrastructure development. And then one of the new programs that I was talking about is electric vehicles. Illinois is estimated to receive $149 million for EV charging. There will be a competitive program, $2.5 billion for EV charging. So those I'll talk about a little further. So our existing programs is this hodgepodge of acronyms here. But these are what we were used to getting essentially. So it's the National Highway Performance Program, the National Highway Freight Program, Bridge Formula, that one's a little tricky, but our STP block grant. STP is our most flexible federal fund source, and NHPP focuses on our NHS system. HSIP is our safety program. TAP is our transportation alternatives program. So looking at bike and ped facilities, the enhancement program is funded out of TAP. Congestion mitigation and air quality, I already spoke to. Metro planning is what supports our MPOs, and also our SPR program, and then grade crossing protection fund. So we have 3 new formula programs that were included in IIJA. One is carbon reduction, the other protect, and then electric vehicle charging. I'm going to start with electric vehicle charging. As I mentioned, we're slated to receive about $149 million. The US DOT did, well, the joint, it also indicated, IIJA indicated that US DOT and the Department of Energy would create a joint office, and they would be administering this program. That joint office has been created, and they did put out guidance for the funding. The guidance essentially indicates that you have to have you will spend this funding on any signage pending or signage ready road. So there's a process for designating roads to become signage pending for EV charging infrastructure or any other alternative fuel. Illinois does already have some signage. We actually have signage up on some of our roads because we do meet the goal, the requirement of having an electric vehicle charger every 50 miles. And so those, of course, a lot of those are up in Northeast Illinois. There's a current designation open now, and so we will designate we will request to designate new roads, and that is how we are required to prioritize how we spend this money. We have to use it to put electric vehicle charging infrastructure along those corridors every 50 miles. It could be more frequent if desired. We have to develop a plan for how we're going to do that, the public outreach we're going to do, how we're going to procure it, all by August 1st. So we are diligently working on that. The carbon reduction program, and the protect program were caught up in a technicality that resolved itself earlier this month, or earlier in March. And they're just starting to work on the guidance for that now. And so from what we can tell from the legislation, carbon reduction is similar to the congestion mitigation and air quality program, and we expect to receive about $50 million a year for each of these. Carbon reduction seems to focus on new technology. So, transportation demand management, ITS type of work to reduce reduce emissions. There is a sub-allocation to that. We're still waiting guidance on it. The Protect program, again, we're estimated to receive about $50 million a year for that. And this is focusing on resiliency type projects. And it encourages state DOTs and MPOs to develop a resiliency improvement plan, which is something that the IDOT is going to initiate soon. And that will help identify projects for that. But in the meantime, we're awaiting guidance on what types of projects would be eligible. All right, so with that is all I have, and I want to thank you all very much. I also want to highlight we need help. I think everyone needs help, and so if you look at our employment page, we have a lot of positions posted, and there's a lot of things coming down the pipe. So keep your eyes open, and thank you all very much for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Like I said at the beginning, if you have any questions, please put it in the questions box for her to answer. We do have a couple questions already. The first one, what will be Illinois' involvement in the Amtrak repairs and upgrades?
So that's a good question. Illinois does work with Amtrak, and I'm not an expert in this by any means, so I can get back if you want to send me this in writing. But my understanding is that Illinois does provide assistance to Amtrak as we can for that. I think we also have state-supported routes, which means we pay for some service on some of our routes. I'm not sure which ones. So maybe that's something, Emily, you can send me and I can get more information and share back with you.
Okay. We do have a couple others. This one says, how do you compete for funds with other states?
That's a good question. And I thought I had that slide in my presentation, but I didn't. So thanks for asking that because I forgot to mention it. So RAISE and infra are two examples that are federal discretionary programs. And so it's essentially US DOT acts as almost like a state DOT in putting out like a notice of funding opportunity, identifying what kind of criteria, what kind of projects they're looking for. And then we apply. We put in applications and compete against other states. We compete against other jurisdictions even, some locals, some cities, some transit agencies, some port districts, so the state will compete and then US DOT is making those funding recommendations. And prior to IIJA, there was really only two. There was RAISE and there was infra. The first one was called Tiger, and I think that was in like 2014, maybe 2015. And it was kind of, maybe it was before then, but that was the first federal discretionary program where we would identify projects and apply for them and compete. Compared to formula funds, which formula funds are given to us and we're able to program against them as long as we're following general program guidelines. So IIJA created some like 30 new discretionary programs for highways. And a lot of them are mirroring those new programs that we're seeing. So there's a federal discretionary bridge program, there's a federal discretionary EV charging program, and so on and so forth. And we're still waiting guidance on that. I think, talking to my FHWA friends, that's a lot of work to administer programs and it's not something they've typically done. And so, but there's so much excitement around it. I also think Illinois checks a lot of this federal administration's boxes that it's looking for when it comes to priorities. And we have so many needs in Illinois that are very costly. And so I think Illinois has historically competed very well, and I think we're going to continue to compete very well.
Okay, we have a few more. The next question, what types of expenditures does the road fund support?
Oh, that's a good question. So the road fund the road fund does support our IDOT salaries. So that's my paycheck comes from the road fund. Any travel I do is reimbursed from the road fund. It also pays for our IDOT's facilities, so it can pay for all of our operations. It also pays for grants to locals and construction projects. So yeah, there is that is what I'd say is our most flexible fund to pay out of. It is limited to transportation use only, but most of IDOT's stuff is paid out of there.
Okay. The next question, the downward spiral of population in Illinois, what is its projected effect on IDOT funding?
That's a good question. We estimate that, I would say generally, I think our biggest concern about our revenue would be electric vehicles. because, as I mentioned, motor fuel tax is going to be the largest revenue source for the department. As vehicles become more efficient, right, we're going to decrease receiving motor fuel tax. So that's something that we're concerned about, but and we do forecast that in our assumptions for our program size. The Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, the Illinois legislation that passed last year, and had a lot of energy implications, but it actually, and EV adoption, but it actually included that the department has to do a revenue study where we have to estimate what our decline is based on the adoption of electric vehicles, along with any potential revenue replacement options. So we are in procurement for that now, and we'll be kicking that off this summer. So I'd say that's our biggest issue, our biggest concern. Population decline obviously is not something that anyone wants, but I think compared to electric vehicle adoption, it's kind of a minimal concern when it comes to revenue for transportation.
The next question, how much of an increase does IIJA provide in existing formula funds from the FAST Act?
So existing formula funds, that's what I was mentioning. Let's see if I can get back there. So existing formula funds, we have been receiving formula funds since the federal program was developed. I think it was like in the 50s, 1950s. And each year has become more and more. So we always assume we're going to have federal funds when we're forecasting our revenue. So that $17 billion number is very large, especially when we were already considering we were going to be receiving funds. So for existing formula programs, it's actually just about which we're happy with, but about a 12% increase over existing formula programs.
Okay, the Shawneetown Port Authority received an $11.2 million IDOT grant. What is this going to be used for?
We did, yeah. So that was the port program that was included in the RBI for, it was $150 million. And we did a competitive program. I believe this is on our website. I believe the Shawneetown was for essentially development of the port. So purchasing land was my understanding, but don't quote me on that. The information is on our website. And how that will work, you know, this is the first time IDOT, the state of Illinois, I believe, has ever invested in our public port multimodal system. And so we worked with the 19 public port districts. We developed a marine transportation system plan that identified goals and objectives and collected data. Projects were submitted to us, and Shawneetown did submit a project and it scored well. And so it was included in the program for funding. Now we have to work with those port districts and our Bureau of Local Roads to enter into agreements so they have access for funds to do the scope that they identified.
Okay, and I believe this next one is a quiz question, but where does Illinois rank amongst other states in terms of moving freight?
Yeah. So I discussed that at the beginning of the PowerPoint with our FAST. I hope I'm not giving you all motion sickness. It's not included on the PowerPoint. However, Illinois is the third largest mover of freight in terms of value and tonnage.
Okay. Looks like we have another one. Is the debt service from previous bonds getting paid off on schedule?
Yep. The first thing we pay is debt service.
Okay, and this is going to be the last question. The funding for debt service is coming from road funds, MSP, RBI, then there's just a question mark. So I don't know.
I'm gonna have to cheat here. I'm gonna stop. Oh, give me 1 second.
You're fine.
All right. So the debt service comes off the top, and we support it out of our road fund. It's very complicated. Out of our road fund on Series A bonds. And then a lot of our other bonds are multimodal in nature. So the public transportation fund pays the debt service on skip bonds. And yeah, I can share this too, if that'd be useful. What pays for what. Oh, you probably can't see my notes, I'm sorry. I'll share this on my screen, so. Oh, you can see my screen. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it, yeah.
Yep. So debt service on Series A bonds comes out of the road fund.
Okay.
Skip bonds come out of the public transportation funds, the public transportation fund. I hope that answers the person's question.
Yeah, and that's all the questions we have. And if anyone has any questions, I believe Holly put her her email at the last slide. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to her, or you can email me and I can direct any more questions to her. But that's all we have for today. Thank you everyone for attending our presentation, and thanks Holly for your time. Be sure to take the quiz that's linked in the chat box to receive your PDH, and make sure to register for next month's First Friday webinar. Thanks everyone, have a good weekend.
Thank you.